Picture this, you're alone on a winding forest trail at dawn. It's cold enough for the coffee in your travel mug to steam. The air is filled with birdsong and a mist. That's just beginning. To catch the morning sunlight, then snap, a shape emerges from the underbrush. Not a deer, not a raccoon, but a wild red fox, her fur shaped by the elements, her nose twitching like a seismic sensor. She hesitates and, astonishingly, a group of kits tumbles out behind her, not in panic, not with a warning bark, but with a kind of cautious insistence. She's gently nudging one of them toward you. For a moment, it's honestly hard to tell who's more surprised, you or the fox. Now, if you grew up around wildlife, you've probably heard a certain kind of family story. Maybe it came from your uncle after a couple of drinks, or from the neighbor down the street. The claim that some wild animal, a fox, squirrel, crow, dolphin, or whatever creature you can imagine, somehow chose them. A one-in-a-million person, trusted with something so precious and vulnerable that it could barely survive on its own. A baby animal, offered in a moment that's equal parts miracle, absolute weirdness, and, let's be honest, a completely unbelievable dinner table story. Normally we'd file stories, like these under unlikely or someone's exaggerating for the story. But here's the thing. These stories don't go away. They keep showing up in field research, conservation reports, and viral videos that reach parts of the world you didn't even know had Wi-Fi. And it's not just mammals with large brains and expressive faces. You see it across the animal kingdom. Dolphins nudging tangled calves toward boats. Elephant herds gathering around trusted rangers when a calf is limping. Wild crows leaving sick birds on porches. Or yes, foxes gently pushing shy, blinking kits forward. Of course, it's tempting to dismiss all of this as coincidence, wishful thinking, or maybe the strange result of decades of Disney movies. But as the examples continue to pile up, something else becomes clear. This is a real, repeatable, observable pattern appearing across continents and time zones, in animals that share almost nothing except one fact. By all logic, they should want absolutely nothing to do with us. So what's going on here? Let's peel back the first layer and ask the most obvious question. Why would a wild animal, driven by survival, whose entire evolutionary playbook could be summed up as avoid humans, not only approach us but bring its most vulnerable young right to our doorstep? What makes this so fascinating is that you don't even have to be a lifelong biologist to recognize how unusual it is. Our entire species is what you might call apex stressor material. For almost every wild animal, a human is a walking alarm bell, a reason to freeze, run, or disappear into the nearest bush. Even the pets that share our homes, the cats and dogs curled up on our couches, are descended from thousands of years of ancestors that only slowly, cautiously, and often reluctantly learned to trust us. So what's really happening? Magic, secret animal telepathy? Or is there something stranger, and at the same time more ordinary, going on? Let's take a closer, more forensic look because, like most real-world mysteries, the answer is messy, a collection of overlapping, sometimes contradictory and deeply fascinating explanations. Let's talk about the animal kingdom's memory champions. If you've ever had the unsettling feeling that the local crows are watching you, good news, they definitely are. And they remember your face. Years after a single encounter, individual crows can remember whether you were a friend, a threat, or simply the person who left peanuts on a park bench. The story from Seattle has become almost legendary among scientists. Researchers wore creepy plastic masks while harassing crows as part of a long-term study. The result? Decades later, the crows still recognize those masks and, more importantly, treat anyone wearing them as a sworn enemy. But now flip the situation around. If you're the person who feeds crows, rescues them, or is simply a harmless bystander, those same birds have been seen bringing their sick or stranded young directly into your backyard. Not by chance, not by accident, but as a deliberate effort to bring them to the safest place they know. This isn't just a coincidence driven by crow curiosity. The entire crow family, ravens, magpies, and jays, shows similar behavior. Field evidence suggests this knowledge may even be passed along socially. In other words, adult birds don't just remember which humans can be trusted, they also teach that information to their young and sometimes to other members of their social group. Crows and magpies, in particular, seem to keep a cross-generational human logbook. One bird's positive experience becomes a small cultural tradition. It's like a Yelp review, but for survival. Now let's dive, figuratively, into the ocean, where the stakes And the brains are even bigger. There's a growing international collection of cases where dolphins and whales, faced with a distressed calf tangled in fishing lines, injured by boat propellers, sick, or otherwise unable to cope, deliberately seek out the nearest humans, usually boats, sometimes not even the regular research teams. The mother positions herself and her calf beside the vessel, sometimes remaining there for hours, keeping the calf at the surface while watching and waiting. She doesn't panic. She doesn't attack. Often, the moment a human reaches out to help, the mother doesn't interfere. In some cases, she even appears to assist. This happens far too often, and across far too many populations, to be dismissed as a statistical coincidence. Marine biologists suggest that cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and porpoises are especially capable of trusting other species because of their own traditions of cooperative parenting. Within dolphin pods and some whale groups, babysitting and group problem-solving are completely normal behaviors. Add to that an extraordinary ability to recognize individuals and remember interactions with humans for years, sometimes even for a lifetime, and you begin to see the outlines of genuine situation-specific trust. Then there's the land-based playbook. Elephants may be among the most emotionally complex and socially connected non-human animals on Earth. They mourn their dead, celebrate births, and show clear signs of joy, grief, curiosity, and even forgiveness. In multiple sanctuaries across Africa and Asia, herds have been seen presenting injured or orphaned calves to the very humans responsible for caring for them. The pattern is remarkable. An elephant mother stands back anxious but hopeful, while a trusted caretaker approaches her calf. In some cases, elephants have clearly guided their calves toward certain humans, while giving everyone else a very, very wide berth. This isn't some mystical coincidence. The ability to remember individual humans is well documented. There are well-known cases of elephants recognizing trusted people after as many as 20 years apart. These aren't just animals that remember faces. They remember acts of kindness, specific moments of help, and patterns of safety. For a species whose home range can stretch across hundreds of miles, the fact that a matriarch can recognize and trust a particular human is essentially the emotional equivalent of a wild animal having your contact information on speed dial. And it's not just the large mammals. Foxes, often considered too shy or too wild to develop any kind of trust, are increasingly being observed bringing their kits to specific rural homes, usually those with a long history of tolerance. No attempts to trap them, and perhaps the occasional treat left outside. In parts of Eastern Europe and the United Kingdom, it's almost a rural tradition. A backyard fox brings her young to rest near the same quiet, distant family every spring. Researchers believe this behavior develops over many seasons of learning that these humans aren't a threat. Around them, our babies are safer. Similarly, wolves and coyotes, which generally avoid humans, also show signs of ancestral memory. In regions where hunting pressure is low and wolf populations have lived alongside non-threatening humans for generations, some packs have been observed tolerating an unexpected level of closeness during times of need. In Yellowstone, researchers involved in wolf reintroduction projects have documented adult wolves displaying behavior similar to a quick threat assessment, carefully judging whether a particular human can be trusted enough to allow a closer approach, often only when their pups need help. Let's break this down into its individual pieces. The stacked logic behind the world's bravest fox, mothers, and elephant matriarchs. 1. Individual memory and social transmission. It starts with individuals almost every time. A crow, a mother fox, or an elderly elephant matriarch remembers the details of its personal interactions with humans, both positive and negative. But animals don't live in isolated social groups. They observe, communicate, and, especially in highly social species, pass these experiences along to their families and groups. A crow's recognition becomes the flock's shared understanding. An elephant's trust spreads through the herd's behavior. There is even evidence suggesting that wild mice learn how dangerous humans are by observing their mothers. 2. The legacy of domestication and behavioral plasticity. Domestication transformed ancestral wolves into dogs, not by simply turning on a friendly switch, but through generations of favoring calmer, less fearful animals that approached humans instead of running away. This domestication syndrome, the collection of traits that includes floppy ears, friendliness, and a willingness to stay close to humans, has echoes in both wild and semi-wild animals. Urban foxes and raccoons show much greater tolerance for humans than their deep forest relatives. This isn't genetic domestication. It's behavioral plasticity, the ability to adopt safer behaviors that are rewarded through survival over generations. Research even suggests that foxes raised around friendly humans consistently approach those people, while their wild relatives, living under constant hunting, pressure, run in the opposite direction. In the famous Russian fox domestication experiments, foxes began wagging their tails and seeking belly rubs after only a few dozen generations. The lesson is simple. Tolerance toward humans can evolve surprisingly quickly when the benefits outweigh the risks. 3. Scent recognition and the invisible signature. Most mammals experience the world primarily through scent. Your soap, your laundry detergent, even what you ate for breakfast, all combine to create a unique scent signature that animals can recognize, remember, and classify as either safe or suspicious. A fox kit being nudged toward your campsite isn't responding only to your voice. It's recognizing a collection of familiar scents that have become associated with safety. Experiments have shown that even rodents can learn to connect specific human scents with food, protection, or most importantly, the absence of pain. Some scientists argue that species with repeated negative experiences around humans classify all human scent as dangerous, overriding every other signal. But where conflict is rare and positive experiences accumulate, the opposite pattern develops, for desperation and decision-making under extreme stress. Here's the less romantic and far more brutal reality. Sometimes a wild animal's decision isn't really a choice at all. An injured parent, a flooded den, a nearby predator, or a disabled caregiver living in a dangerous world can completely change the risk calculation. The natural instinct to avoid humans is pushed aside by a more urgent priority, keeping the baby alive. In that moment, large, slow-moving animal that didn't hurt me last time suddenly becomes the best option left. It's almost as if the animal world has an emergency protocol. When everything else fails, try the human. Sometimes, incredibly, it works. 5. The human response to infant distress. Now here's where humans enter the story in a way we rarely think about. Strong scientific evidence suggests that the distress calls of babies, whether human or animal, are processed in remarkably similar ways by the human brain. They increase our attention, raise stress hormone levels, and most importantly, trigger an almost irresistible urge to help. Parents know this instinct well, but it doesn't stop at our own species. That's why it's so difficult to ignore. The cries of a stray kitten or the desperate chirping of young birds. Some scientists believe this response is part of our own long evolutionary history as highly social caregivers. Over time, animals may learn to recognize this opportunity. If approaching humans repeatedly results in kindness, food, or genuine help, that lesson spreads. The fox, the crow, and the dolphin, each through experience or observation, begins to associate humans with being a last resort caretaker. And that reputation spreads surprisingly quickly. 6 local differences. Not every human earns trust. By now, you've probably noticed something important. This behavior isn't universal. You don't see gazelles in trophy hunting regions bringing their fawns to humans. In places where people act as predators or are simply unpredictable, this kind of trust never develops. If an animal population is regularly hunted, trapped, harassed, or displaced, humans are permanently categorized as a threat. The trust we've been discussing appears only in places where several generations, or even a handful of positive encounters, create an upward cycle. Animals learn, pass the lesson along, and the behavior grows stronger. Populations living in protected reserves, peaceful farmland, certain suburbs, and managed parks consistently show more prosocial behavior toward humans. In some situations, it takes only one trustworthy person to change everything. Feeding stray cats, rescuing an injured bird, or freeing a tangled dolphin calf. The lesson spreads and the behavior remains. 7. Ecological feedback loops and hidden exchanges. A feedback loop begins to form. Every successful rescue, every feeding, and every gentle interaction builds a little more confidence in animals. That confidence leads to another interaction, which becomes another story, which is observed, remembered, and stored. It's a quiet cycle of growing trust, developing in the background while most people go about their lives without ever noticing the extra kittens or the baby squirrel exploring around their campsite. The psychological effect on humans, a two-way transformation. This phenomenon doesn't affect only animals. People who experience the trust of a wild animal often describe it as life-changing, an encounter with nature that feels far more meaningful than an ordinary wildlife sighting. Park rangers describe these moments as defining experiences in their careers. Sanctuary workers tell rescue stories that become part of local legend. These aren't simply stories for social media. They influence entire communities, changing the way people think about the wildlife around them. That shift can create a safer environment, not only for animals, but for humans as well. So what does it all mean? Is it trust, desperation, or a transaction? If you step back and examine the pattern across all of these stories, from the fox in your backyard to the dolphin beside a boat, the answer is surprisingly complex. Sometimes it's trust, carefully built, socially shared, and individually tested. Sometimes it's desperation, a parent with no better option, taking a chance on the largest and strangest helper available. Sometimes it's a transaction, years of harmless interactions paying off in a single critical moment. But more often than not, it's all of these things at once, a tapestry woven from learned behavior, evolutionary spillover, ancient instincts, and new experiences. When you stop viewing these stories as isolated miracles and start seeing them as visible signs of a much larger and quieter cross-species negotiation, a different picture begins to emerge. Trust in the animal world isn't automatic. It's built slowly through countless small experiences. Every bowl of food, every careful approach, every rescue, and every peaceful interaction becomes another small yes in the record. Every loud noise, every chase, and every gunshot becomes another no. The result is never permanent, and it's certainly never unconditional. But in the truest sense of the word, it is earned, not because animals have collectively forgiven us for centuries of harmful behavior, not because they somehow know we're good, but because every once in a while, a combination of memory, inherited learning, environmental signals, scent recognition, and human reliability breaks through millions of years of evolutionary caution. A fox in the forest, a crow in the city, and a dolphin beneath the waves are all running a mental algorithm that's far more sophisticated than we usually imagine. Their brains and instincts, shaped over millions of years of danger and opportunity, are constantly weighing the odds. Is this human safe? What happened the last time? Did my mother trust them? What happened to the other animals that came close? In those rare moments when the answer is safe enough, when the alternative is failure, and the most precious thing they have is at risk, they take a chance, and sometimes, remarkably, it works. The baby survives. The experience becomes part of memory. Trust grows a little stronger. A new generation carries that knowledge forward. If you're looking for one simple answer, here it is. Wild animals bring their babies to humans because, in just enough places and at just enough moments, we've earned that trust. Not as a species, not because humans are somehow special, but because individual people have built it through thousands of small unseen acts. Every gentle hand, every meal shared, and every peaceful moment of coexistence becomes a potential lifeline, not just for one animal but for the entire ecosystem it belongs to. And in the very best cases, it's not only the animal that changes. We change too. So the next time you hear about a fox bringing her kits, a dolphin guiding her calf, or an elephant leading an injured baby toward a fence, maybe see it for what it really is. Not a miracle, but a lesson about what's possible, what's fragile, and what decades, or even centuries of thoughtful choices can achieve for all of us.